It's come up a number of times about Canaan, the name Canaan in Luke's genealogy. It doesn't appear in the Old Testament, yet every other name coincides. So, let's take a look above and see. Here are all the names. On the right, Old Testament. On the left, Luke. And down there, where Canaan occurs, look, nothing, it's not there. There's a name missing. So let's go on down and see what the explanation might be. We notice that one name is missing in the Old Testament series, which is found in Luke's genealogy. Canaan is the son of Arphaxad, and Shelah is the son of Canaan, according to Luke, while in the Chronicle this name is not found. However, in Hebrew traditional lineage, this name can be found in the Septuagint. The name Canaan is found in certain key papyri manuscript copies and the Septuagint as well, the latter of which is an early Greek translation of the Old Testament, which dates from about 250 BC. Yet most Old Testament translations favor the Masoretic text somewhere around 500 AD and even later, 900 to 1000 AD, when it comes to the exclusion of Canaan. You have manuscript evidence highly in favor of addition, and yet it's excluded. So, on the other hand, as stated by Mills, there is much evidence for the name Canaan to be included. The argument, he says, is to support the authenticity of the Canaan reading in the original manuscript is strong. C. Robert Federer, who has made a detailed study of this problem, states that Codex Bezae Uncialdi is the only manuscript of consequence which excludes Canaan. The others include. So, Metzger has this to say about Uncialdi. Different in several respects from all the manuscripts mentioned above, all the papyri and anything in BC, dating from the 5th or possibly 6th century. The text is presented in Greek and Latin. The Gospels stand in so-called Western order, Matthew, John, Luke, and Mark. No known manuscript has so many and such remarkable variations from what is usually taken to be the normal New Testament text. Codex Bezae's special characteristic is the free addition and occasional omission of words, and so on. So much for that. So we've got the addition of Canaan in the text as verified by the evidence. Move on back. Belshazzar, is he real? The relationship between Nabonidus and Belshazzar in Daniel. Professor Pastor Don Leatherman wrote and emailed me on this subject. When 19th century historians read Daniel chapter 5, they immediately noticed a problem. Daniel states that Belshazzar was the last king of Babylon when the Persians overthrew the city in 539 BC. However, any discerning historian realized that, according to all extant documents, Nabonidus was the last king of Babylon at this time. Historical critical scholars jumped at the opportunity and said that Daniel was not accurate in its depiction of Babylonian activities, and therefore must have been written during the time of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, 2nd century BC. Traditional scholars try desperately to connive our explanations. This is a serious problem and needs to be addressed. Was Nabonidus the last king of Babylon? Did Belshazzar exist? And if so, what was his position? New documentation has become available that greatly aids in this research. First, we must address the question of Nabonidus. As mentioned before, the Babylonian chronological listing of its kings consistently end with Nabonidus. Greek historians that have recorded the history of this period generally agree that Nabonidus was the last king. The next king mentioned after Nabonidus is Cyrus. The evidence is very obvious that Nabonidus was the last ruler of Babylon. However, some interesting things arrive from this. Where did Nabonidus come from? Nabonidus' father was Nabonidus, whatever that As indicated from various documents, were Nabonidus' names his father. But who was Nabonidus Ikbi? In one document, we find the following statement. Nabonidus, the king of Babylon, the appointed one of Nebu, and Marduk, the son of Nabonidus Ikbi, the wise prince am I. Nabonidus' father is called the wise prince, the perfect prince, the reverer of the great gods and goddesses, and the courageous minister. Simply a nobleman dedicated to the worshipping of the gods. So how did Nabonidus become king if his father was only a pious nobleman? To answer this question, we must turn to Nabonidus' mother and his wife and see if we can learn anything of them. A lot of research this guy did. We have one Babylonian record that might be talking about Nabonidus' mother. The reason for this conclusion are too complicated for our discussion here in this paper. However, we can assume that this document does talk about Nabonidus' mother, who is therefore probably called Shumaya Damqua. According to this document, Shumaya Damqua was a priestess of the moon god Sin. Herodotus uses the name Nabonidus for Nabonidus, and in one of his references to Nabonidus, he talks of Cyrus coming to attack the wife of Nabonidus and their son. Herodotus does not name the son, but says that he had the same name as his father and acted in his father's place. So Herodotus says the name Nabonidus' wife was Nitocris. This adds a whole new dimension to the research, since Nitocris is the name of an Egyptian princess of the 26th dynasty, contemporaneous with the Babylonian dynasty of Nabopolassar. Again, the details are far too difficult to discuss in depth, but let it suffice to say that it is probable that Nebuchadnezzar married an Egyptian, and that they had a daughter whom they named Nitocris, and whom Nabonidus married. This now leads us to a question who Nabonidus was, that he would be able to marry a daughter of the greatest king of this Babylonian dynasty. The records that we have do not give a genealogy of Nabonidus beyond his father's name and the possible mention of his mother, Shumua Damqua. There is no indication that Nabonidus is directly related to or descended from Nebuchadnezzar. Records do indicate, however, that he was active in Babylon as a high official even during Nebuchadnezzar's reign. The cuneiform text of Nebuchadnezzar's 8th year mentions Nabonidus, whom it calls the son of a man of royalty of a king. Another duplicate of this text describes him with the phrase, who is over the city. His ancestry is not mentioned. The relation is clear. As early as the 8th century of Nebuchadnezzar, Nabonidus was over a city as its ruler, governor, or commander. The city is not mentioned by name in the text, but of all the similar texts, most deal with the major cities of the Babylonian Empire, such as Borsippa, Erech, and Babylon. It is unclear, though, which city Nabonidus was the ruler of. His prominence can be seen in another record, that of Herodotus, who tells of a certain Nabonidus, who was chosen to be the Babylonian treaty maker that met with his Lydian counterpart, Sinesus of Cilicia. The negotiations were successful and the peace was made sealed by the marriage of the Alaites, the Lydians' daughter, to Astyages, the Mede. All this took place in the 20th year of Nebuchadnezzar. It is almost certain that Nabonidus was Nabonidus, at least in Herodotus' mind, and this fits quite well with the data mentioned. If Nabonidus was old enough and skilled enough to be the ruler of a city during Nebuchadnezzar's 8th year, then certainly by the 20th year he might be considered capable of handling the responsibility of the Babylonian treaty maker. So we may conclude that Nabonidus held an exalted position in Nebuchadnezzar's court as early as Nebuchadnezzar's 8th year, and continued that on through Nebuchadnezzar's reign. This makes it entirely possible that Nabonidus would marry the daughter of his king. The actual way in which Nabonidus came to the throne is still somewhat ambiguous. A dynastic table might help to clarify what can be summarized from the various accounts. This, however, does not do complete justice. A chronological list of the Babylonian kings according to the cuneiform text might also be useful. This guy did a whole bunch of research. So, one thing is clear, Nabonidus was king, and he was not a usurper either. Labashi Marduk is displayed as a very poor king reigning against the wishes of the gods, and Borosus does indicate that he was assassinated, but there is no indication that Nabonidus played any role in the assassination, although he may have favored it. Apparently, after the assassination, the ones responsible for finding a new king selected Nabonidus, as he was very qualified for the service. So, let's get back to Daniel. Wow. It now becomes necessary in our discussion to turn to Belshazzar, okay, and discuss who he was and what function he plays in this story. Wow. A lot of research. First, we must discuss the existence of Belshazzar at all. Until fairly recently, there was no extra-biblical evidence for the existence of a man named Belshazzar in the time indicated by the book of Daniel. Commentary on Daniel from 1875 mentions two possible explanations for the seeming discrepancy between history and the Bible. It says that Belshazzar can be identified with either Merodach or with Nabonidus. It states that the former is the more probable and says that the Medo-Persian conquest at this time does not mean a total conquering, since this obviously took place later in the time of Nabonidus. Now, however, we have more evidence that makes the issue much clearer. In fact, this same commentary adds a footnote that alludes to the suggestion which is now accepted by many, if not most scholars, whether conservative or historical critical in their interpretation. Belshazzar co-reigned with his father and acted in his father's stead when his father was absent, which, as we shall see, was a good portion of his 17-year reign. First, however, we look at documentation regarding Belshazzar's activity that had become known recently. A number of cuneiform texts show Belshazzar involved in many different activities of Babylon, such as buying, selling, and lending. However, all of this is done through his servants, scribes, etc. All of this occurred during Nabonidus' reign and showed the exalted status that Belshazzar maintained. He did not busy himself with the petty matters of lending money and buying houses. He had more important duties. More evidence of the maturity, dignity, and responsibility shown by Belshazzar during this time is the record of his devotion to the empire's gods. Several times what he gave is recorded. He gave gifts of gold, silver, and animals for the sacrificial sacrifices of the temples. Thus it is demonstrated that Belshazzar was acting as a high official of the time would have, giving the right things to the right places. Now we come to evidence that shows that Belshazzar was indeed appointed by his father, Nabonidus, as co-regent. In the ziggurat of Ur, 4 cylinders were found containing a prayer of Nabonidus. This prayer and a variation of it was also found at Ur place, Belshazzar, in a very close relationship with Nabonidus. It names Belshazzar as the firstborn son and asks for the god's blessing on him. According to Doherty, this type of association of the father and son in a religious entreaty was scarce in cuneiform literature. One other example of such language could be given for his life of Cambyses and his father of Cyrus. Nearly the same language is used on the Cyrus cylinder as it is used on the Ur cylinders. It is clear from other evidence that Cambyses worked in close association with his father Cyrus, ruling over the entire kingdom, and Cambyses in charge of Babylonian affairs. This evidence and other examples of co-regency suggest that Nabonidus and Belshazzar may have had a similar relationship, or rather that Cyrus and Cambyses' relationship might have been a continuation of that started by Nabonidus and Belshazzar. More evidence is needed, and there is more. Keep on going on this, you can see that we have a viability of that in Daniel, and it's historical, and look at all this evidence. So we can read this and continue on. This will about bend my ears closed, but you want evidence? There it is.